Hi folks, my name is Adam and I like Lego. However, that stuff is hella expensive and I'm a millennial in my 30s, so all my money goes towards paying my landlord's mortgage. And that means I don't have a whole lot of cash left over to spend on children's toys. What I do have though is a YouTube channel dedicated to making weird stuff out of clay, and I got a whole lot of clay. So why not make my own Lego, but like weird, obviously. Now for those that don't know, this is the Humbo Lego minifig and he's what I'm going to be making today. Of course, I've made a minifig before, but he was an extra big minifig and totally static, so my goal this time is to make a properly sized minifig with swappable posable body parts. So right off the bat, I need some way to make sure I stick to the proper scale, which is where this 2-part silicone putty comes into play. This stuff is the tits. Basically, you just pull out 2 equally sized lumps of part A and part B and blend them together until you're left with a little lump of moldable silicone into which you can press whatever it is that you want to make a mold out of. This time it'll be a minifig chest piece so I can stick to a specific scale. Now to make my posable playable minifig, I'm going to be using Cosclay since it's super flexible and rubbery when cured, which means that if I make the various insertion orifices slightly undersized, then when I press the limbs in place, they should be able to stretch ever so slightly to hold the position without breaking or cracking like normal clay would. I'll fill my minifig form with an appropriate amount of hideously yellow clay, then cut away the excess and toss it in the oven to cure. Once it's cooled down, I can pop it out of the form and chop off the flashing until I've got a mostly recognizable limbless, headless Lego torso. As it turns out, in a lovely twist of fate, the little lengths of dowel that I have are the perfect size for a minifig head. So I'll drill a little neck hole in the top of Carl's torso using my fingers as the drill to keep from splitting the clay, then I can measure up the length of the dowel and chop off a tiny bit off the tip before dry fitting it to make sure it lines up and my head still fits. A quick bit of surgery will make sure Carl's shoulders are equally sized and I'm finally ready to start building out his bulky belly. I could, of course, just make a normal little Lego minifigure and call it a day, but that's not really on brand for this channel, so instead I'm going to be making a realistic interpretation of a Lego man, but with a big fat hairy belly. Oh, and of course he'll be wearing some tighty whities because, I mean, why wouldn't he be? So once I've added a nice round beer belly and bulked out his back with ample rolls and fat folds, I can bake it in the oven again to lock the shape before getting on to making his head. As I mentioned before, this dowel is the perfect size for Carl's neck hole, so I figured it'd be easiest just to build his head directly on top of the tip. However, one thing to remember is that clay won't stick to wood without some sort of glue, but I want to be able to remove the head once it's finished, so I'll start by making a thin layer of clay that's just thick enough to be a minifig neck. I'll then cut it down to the correct size and length and bake it so I have a nice solid clay base that I can build the rest of Carl's thinking box on top of. Once it's been baked, it's got just enough bite to stay stuck on the dowel, but it should be easy enough to pop off later. Then it's just a case of adding clay bit by bit, using the minifig face as reference to make sure my sizing is mostly correct. I'll add the little knob on top to make sure I can add a hat or hair later, then some final smoothing and rounding of the edges will finish the shape and I can start to add the detail, starting by poking some little eye sockets that get filled with little black eyeballs. Some gentle poking with the rounded edge of a silicone shaper will help give Carl some much needed expressiveness around his eyes, and I can start to add his happy little smile. If Carl looks extra sweaty here, it's because I'm using a tiny bit of Vaseline on the tip of my tool to help smooth the clay. Also, there's a heat wave where I live and Carl doesn't exactly have a body built for warm weather, so it's possible that some of the moisture is his body trying to cool down. Now I wanted Carl to have some ears, but in keeping with the rounded Lego man anatomy, I don't want them to stick out, so I'll poke a couple deep divots into the side of his head where his ears would be. Finally, some final orificing on his top knob will bring my head to completion. And if you're having trouble telling which is which, the original Lego man is on the right while Carl's head is on the left. Once it's been baked, I can twist his head off the dowel and admire the perfectly sized neck hole. A quick dry fit on the Lego body to make sure both parts are compatible, and I'm ready to get to work making Carl's legs. I'll use my minifig legs to line up the leg attachment sphincters by painting the tips with a bit of white chalk and pressing both parts together. This will leave me with the correct location for the sphincters, which I can drill out using my finger-powered drill, then double check the spacing using my Lego legs. To make Carl's legs, I made another silicone mold but of the front of the minifig legs, which I'll then cut down into the individual legs and drill out a couple mounting holes on the sides. I know the legs will be the most awkward part to make movable since the connection points will be very thin and flimsy, so I'm going to try to make his crotchal region out of tongue depressors. These particular tongue depressors are made out of natural wood, so you know they're high quality and should be able to handle the stresses of an overweight Lego man's legs. I'll cut the tip off the stick, then drill a little hole in the center so I can fit my leg through and to mark out the proper size for his crotch. I'll then cut away the excess and try and force the leg back through the hole, making sure to snap the centerpiece in half. I'll then remake the crotch from a new piece of wood and attach it to another little custom strip of tongue depressor that will be the upper portion of Carl's legs. I'm using extra thin CA glue to connect the pieces, as I'm hoping that this will soak into the wood and help reinforce the fibers. To attach my legs to my torso, I'll fit a couple short lengths of my neck dowel into Carl's torso holes, then add a couple dabs of CA glue and press the legs into place. And once the fit is firm, I can remove the legs and start to cover the wood in tighty-whitey white clay. To help the clay adhere to the wood, I've painted the surface in Bacon Bond, which should both help keep the clay from peeling off, but also reinforce the connection point and make sure I can happily remove my legs whenever I want without fear of the dowel coming loose. Also, once I've got the general tighty-whitey design built up, I can press the crotch into Carl's torso and let his overhanging belly deform the clay so that I have a perfect fit. I'll then refine the shape of the underside so that my legs are form-fitting to his man panties, and I can remove the two sections so that I can then bake the slightly unsightly, possibly stained underwear by itself. In the meantime, I'll get to work refining the shape of his legs. I'll remove some of the sharper edges, then chop his foot off so I can replace it with a slightly more natural looking lump of clay that will be his eventual single toe. I'll then drill a hole in the back of his leg for the ever important Lego man back of the leg sphincter, before adding some slightly wonky knees to make his legs look a little more leg-like. I can't add much detail to the tops of his legs since they need to conform to the shape of his tighty-whities, but I can add a lot of detail to his single big toe. Now, for those unaware of Lego anatomy, your standard minifig doesn't have toes, rather they have a single big toe dead center of the foot. Repeat this entire process but mirrored to give me my right leg, and all I need to do is drill out the bottom of the foot to give me my bottom foot grippy sphincters, and my legs are finished. For the arms, I'll eyeball the center of Carl's torso, then drill out a couple shoulder holes. Since the clay is a bit thicker thanks to his ample upper body, I can use the drill here to speed up the process. Since the arms are a bit thinner, instead of dowel, I'll use some kebab skewers, which are conveniently the same size as a standard minifig shoulder socket, and once I've trimmed them down to size, I can fit them into Carl's side holes so I can build the arms directly on top of his body. Also, to keep the uncured arm from sticking to the torso while I sculpt it, I've painted a thick layer of Vaseline over Carl's side. Otherwise, I can attach some slightly skewed yellow clay sausages onto the exposed shoulder skewers and refine the shape until I've got some ever so slightly muscly looking Lego arms. I'll then poke some teeny tiny divots into the tips of Carl's arm nubs until I've got a big enough hole to fit a hand. I'm sorry, that is it's a poor choice of words. Same as the legs, I'll do it again on the other side, which will leave me with a pair of mostly finished Lego arms that just need a couple little Lego claws. Fortunately, not only are my kebab skewers the perfect size for shoulder sockets, but they're also exactly the correct size to fit in a standard minifig hand. So I guess if you're short on Lego weapons, you can arm an entire Lego army with teeny tiny bow staves if you stock up on kebab sticks after stumbling home from a late night out and in need of some greasy stomach lining. To make my hands then, I can wrap some teeny tiny blobs of clay around my little Turkish bow staff until I've got some teeny tiny yellow Lego claws. I'll use my minifig hand for reference to get the shape and size correct, then same as the foot, I'll give my single fingers a single oversized nail, as well as plenty of wrinkles around the knuckles. I can then attach a couple cut to size toothpicks to the backs before wrapping them in a thin layer of yellow clay. Once they've been baked, they'll slide up and off the skewers so I can friction fit them into Carl's armholes. With that, I can sit back and admire my work. Finally, I've got a fully functional, completely posable homemade minifig, which means the only thing left to do is add a bit of life to Carl by painting some details in. Fortunately, he comes apart easily to make painting each section really simple. At this point, his tidy whities look a little bit too much like a diaper, so I'll give it a quick base coat of white to cover any of the wood that's showing through, then I can add some banding with light gray, which I think helps to sell it as a pair of underwear instead of a pair of adult diapers. I'll then give the entirety of his body a quick sponging with a similarly yellow to help hide any of the discoloration the clay picked up while sculpting, as well as give the surface a bit of texture. Then I can add a touch of pale flesh skin tone by gently dabbing the surface with a thin light pink. To add a bit of shading in the skin folds and various orifices, I'll wash it all with a very transparent brown wash, followed by an equally transparent yellow to help tie all the shades together. Next, I'll base coat the toenails and fingernails in a white that will then get top coated with a heavy sepia wash to make them look extra gnarly and natural. Then I'll come back with my tiniest brush covered in a reddish brown paint to add lots of reddish brown hairs on his legs and arms, as well as build up a nice patch of manly hair on his chest and belly and backside. Each of his exposed leg sphincters will get a reddish wash to add some highlighting, and I'll do the same to his ears, mouth, and the rims around his eyes. Of course, you can't forget to add a little to his top knob, then I'll paint his eyes a deep dark black and add a tiny bit of UV resin to finish them off. Finally, I can reattach all the parts, and Carl is complete and looking exceptionally handsome. In fact, apart from the differences in clothing, I think it's nearly impossible to tell these two apart. Not only that, but I managed to make Carl in such a way that every single one of his parts can be swapped out with a standard minifig, so the options are endless. Otherwise, I think we're done here and on to the glamour shots. As always, a huge thank you to the wonderful patrons of Patreon who continue to help me pay off someone else's mortgage. And a big hey how are you to my newest patrons: Brian Carson, Matthew Taylor, Travis Sharp, Heather Angle, Marie Spalding, Kirsty, Belzenef, Deadpool Inc., Darian Allen, and happy birthday Jillian the Waffle. You are the pristine tidy whities over which this beer belly of a channel hangs. I have to say, I'm chuffed to bits with how Carl turned out, and I can't believe how many baller outfits he can pull off. As you watch him spin around in the background, leave me a comment down below letting me know which version is your favorite. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Cheers.